The views and opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of Natural Bridges Media or KSQD's staff, volunteers, or underwriters.
Hello and welcome to Talk of the Bay. I am your host, Len B.A., and here with me today is David Shaw. David Shaw is a whole systems designer, naturalist, farmer, educator, and musician. His focus is building connections with ourselves, with each other, and with nature. David founded Santa Cruz Permaculture, a company dedicated to amplifying regenerative land stewardship, and the UCSC Right Livelihood Center, a partnership with the alternative Nobel Prize. He completed the apprenticeship in ecological horticulture at the UCSC Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems. He holds an MS in Integrative Eco-Social Design from Gaia University, and he is currently a PhD candidate in the UCSC Environmental Studies program, researching successful transnational alternative policy groups and large-scale ecosystem regeneration solutions. In order to meet the challenges of today, he has created a farm and intergenerational learning center that fosters hands-on farm and wilderness skills, cultural competence, social entrepreneurship, and collective action. David Shaw, welcome to Talk of the Bay.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
So I wanted to start out with the basics because you're involved in so many things. Could you explain what permaculture is?
Well, on one level, it's a portmanteau, permanent culture. It's putting those two words together. So I look at it as living on the planet as if we want to be permanent here, as if we want humans and all life to be permanent here. So a lot of people think about permaculture as a form of agriculture, right? Permaculture is a response to industrial agriculture.
Right.
And it absolutely is. In fact, I would say the best examples and the easiest way to learn about permaculture is in the garden, in the fields. However, when we think more broadly about what permaculture is, agriculture is just one petal on the permaculture flower. We have this image we call the permaculture flower, and it's like a daisy with a bunch of different petals, and one of them is land and nature stewardship, including forestry and care for our oceans and rivers and agriculture. But there's other petals too, like natural building, energy, tools and technology, but then also what we call the, quote, invisible structures. So psychology, politics, economics. So as you see, it's really whole systems design. That's really how I would describe permaculture. It's sort of the lenses through which you see your world. There's no such thing as just permaculture. It's always permaculture design. It's a design science, if you will. And so a more broad and I might say academic definition of permaculture is that permaculture is a whole systems design science rooted in the wisdom of nature-connected communities and ecosystems that has a sort of system of principles and practices, this evolving bundle of best practices to create durable and regenerative human settlements across scales, whether it's home garden scale to bioregional or even planetary.
Right. And having the flexibility to start to look at whole systems as a design opportunity as opposed to just a given.
Yeah.
Oh, this is the way it is. And
Yeah.
of course, we've always done it that way. We've all heard that line. That seems to open a lot of doors. I mean, to approach the way we organize our governance, our economy, our infrastructure, our transportation, all of that, as a whole system, and to begin to look at the relationships within it.
Yeah.
That's a very different approach than our sort of fragmented, I'm an economist, I'm an engineer. I'm, I'm a plumber,
I hear you. I mean, I work at the university, that's my day job is at UC Santa Cruz, and we have the academic divisions.
Yes.
There's that word, divisions, the
Right.
division
Humanities.
of social sciences, humanities, arts. We're divided, people. We need to
Right.
get out of our silos, and we talk so much about that. And from a very young age, I've said I wanted to be a specialized generalist. I want to specialize in the general, and I feel like I've done some of that. It's tricky, though. You've heard the phrase master of none, like you specialize in everything, but then you're a master of none of them. So I feel like there's a little bit of a hazard there, but at the same time, to specialize in the general and the relationships is really powerful. There's another definition of permaculture from Patrick Whitefield, which is permaculture is the art of designing beneficial relationships. And I really like that one because it's not, what permaculture is not is an assemblage of nouns. It's not an assemblage of, I've got the composting toilet, I've got the gray water, I've got the solar panels, I've got the herb spiral, I've got all the things, checking it off the list. It's about how the waste of one system is the food of another system, and things are, working in synergy, right? There's that concept of synergy from Buckminster Fuller. And I'd say, Bucky was one of the early inspirations, and that sort of design science revolution thinking was a big early inspiration for permaculture, along with Masanobu Fukuoka and many other, there's Tree Crops by J. Russell Smith. There's a lot of people who were thinking around things related to permaculture much before the term was coined. And so I would say there's a critique of permaculture, which I just got to say, I love the critiques of permaculture. They're really helpful. I have a lot of critiques myself, but one of them is it's just indigenous knowledge rebranded and repackaged. And I'd say, well, we didn't have Donald Trump 100 years ago. We didn't have, nuclear warheads 100 years ago. It's a different time. However, indeed, a lot of these practices are in our DNA. They're ancient. They're found on nearly every continent. And it's important to know those stories and visit those places and give credit to those peoples who have, come up with these practices. And furthermore, we need land back. We need, rematriation and redistribution. So I'm all down for that. At the same time, I would say permaculture, there's a phrase from Penny Livingston, permaculture is the cutting edge of a 12,000-year-old technology. And we say 12,000 because that's around the time that agriculture was, we had the domestication of plants and animals. But a lot of the permaculture stuff, I'd say, goes back to pre-agricultural societies as well.
Yeah.
So,
well, as you referred to it as sort of re-establishing an indigenous relationship, and the root meaning in Latin for indigenous is belonging to a place or belonging to a land. Yeah. And so that sense of having those relationships structured based on where you are, what's the water, what's the soil, what's the climate of the place that you live, and also who are the other beings who inhabit it, both human and other than human, that if that becomes your determinant, and as you said, in permaculture being permanent, if you were looking for permanence in those relationships, only certain kinds of relationships will last. So exactly. That's a very different way of thinking of it. And certainly at this point in our history, it seems like having that big picture view is absolutely essential to navigate any kind of transformation. Because if we're stuck in that sense of, the way it is the way it's always been, and it's always going to be, when the way it is essentially destroying ecosystems, failing us socially on so many levels, and personally for that matter, then it's like, well, just letting it be as it is and not anticipating the need for changes seems like it would be, well, at best naive. And
a missed opportunity. There's two things I want to respond to with that. One is the difference between sustainability and regeneration. And so when we're talking about sustainability, which, the term has been beaten around millions of times, and sometimes it means exactly what we want it to mean, but other times it means nothing. And I think about sustaining the status quo,
Right.
and also the joke is, describe your marriage or your relationship. Yeah, we're sustaining, we're getting by, things are okay, versus regeneration. We're growing, we're learning new things about each other all the time. We're going on dates like we just met, we're healing. Also, regeneration is this notion of healing. Now, just to defend sustainability a little bit, like we do want to sustain life, and we don't always have to have infinite growth.
Right. But the term does get exploited.
It gets exploited, and regenerative, even, the regenerative ag movement there's a whole discourse around co-optation of that. So I don't think any term is without, critique or without the possibility of being co-opted. But I just mean to say that we are really trying to be in the place of regenerating our damaged ecosystems, of building soil organic matter, recharging watersheds, healing damaged relationships within the human family. That's where we really need to be. It's 2024, and we look around and there's just so much devastation, which brings me to the second thing I wanted to say. And I'll use an example around water and our drought. There's a great book I read about 5 years ago called The Heart of Dryness, what we can learn from the Bushmen about the coming age of permanent drought. Permanent drought. I got the title wrong, but it was something like that. And permanent drought is a really interesting concept I want people to really sink into. In California, we don't have a water shortage. We have a water storage shortage. And we've caused drought here in California. When the Spanish first came here, it was too wet and they wanted to dry it out. And so we've done that. And the infrastructure, a lot of it goes back to the Romans, when, the Romans had the Roman clock, the Roman aqueduct, when you could, pee and poo in water and it would just take it away. And
Right.
I've been to a way on Neary Lagoon and seen what happens with all that. It's not how I would prefer to spend all this money and energy pumping water and pumping poop over here and over there and this and that. We know how to do it better. And then also the Roman roads, the roads that go north, south, east, west, to allow 2 chariots to keep the entire citadel on lockdown, one going north, south, one going east, west. So there's all these things from the divide and conquer times,
from an imperial
that
mindset.
we just take for granted in our modern society. Of course, we want flush toilets, and there are, good reasons for hygiene and whatnot, but there are dry toilets in many parts of the world that are way better for human health than wet toilets, flush toilets. The roads, we want geomorphic roads that are really designed with the landscape, not just this thing that's designed by an architect some 100 miles away who's never even been to the city before, and on like that. And so back to water, we have this situation where the rain is falling on these impervious roofs to these downspouts to storm drains out to the ocean. But what we need to do is actually slow down the water, spread it out on the landscape, and sink it in. And we know this, and there's a lot of infrastructure projects going in to heal this. But we are hundreds of years deep into a pretty big problem here, and we can reverse drought in California. We know how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've done, I think particularly of the Central Valley where, there's stories of it, just being a marshland in the winter and spring, completely like mountain range to mountain range with literally tens of millions of migrating birds, using that marsh environment as their stopover on their way heading north, and then again on their way heading south. And the amount of effort that was put into draining all of that and drying it out.
Right.
And now, we're hearing stories where they've pumped the aquifers so intensively that it's actually collapsing the geological structure underneath the valley. And so there's subsidence. When you think about that, like this is not soil removal. This is just the water in the pore space between the subterranean rock that is removed has caused subsidence in some places in excess of 2 feet. That's a lot. That's a lot. You think about squeezing a sponge, to get that much subsidence over, essentially whatever it is, hundreds of thousands of acres is, yeah. So I wanted to jump back a little bit. You mentioned how, the idea of using indigenous understanding, or what's sometimes referred to as native technology, or I think there's another term, which
traditional ecological knowledge, or
thank
tech.
you, traditional ecological
We're all
knowledge.
techies here,
Right? And that's an incredibly strong foundation. And as the more we learn about it, the more we learn about how indigenous people were managing the landscape, the more comprehensive and sophisticated we understand it to be. But I was wondering,
just pause and say were and are. There are many tribal people still practicing these ways right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. It's just that most of us don't see it in the landscape because we're not exposed to the places where they're actively engaged in that again, because we're in cities and we're in industrial farmland and that kind of thing. Were and are. But are there also some new practices that maybe weren't part of that are part of permaculture practice in terms of land stewardship?
Yeah, I would say so. For example, keyline water harvesting and the keyline design system of creating a whole sort of network of bioregional ponds and using a tractor with a subsoiler that can move water just below the surface from wetter areas to drier areas. But there's a quote from one of the co-originators of the concept, Bill Mollison, who said, "Though the problems of the world become increasingly complex, the solutions remain embarrassingly simple." And so, to your question, I want to say, most of them are old. Most of them are really simple. So at the root, fermenting and drying foods when you have an abundance, that's old. Using a forced air dryer or a passive solar food dryer hooked up to your greenhouse, those things are relatively new, but the overall concept, which is really the bulk of what we're trying to teach, is actually old. So yeah, most of it just goes, it's grandma and grandpa's wisdom, just bringing it back and popularizing it and trying to heal those relationships to make it possible. There are, solar panels come to my mind, and there are these newer technologies, but a big part of permaculture is DIY or DIO, do it ourselves. So when we look at technologies, there's a whole set of questions that come to us from the science and technology studies, sort of subfield of sociology, which is, who owns it? Who benefits? Who benefits the most? Who can fix it? Who decides what? And so a lot of the times we look at these technologies and say, you know what? If this were to break, I couldn't do anything about it. I'd be stranded. Right to repair or not, I can't do anything with this. So going back to more simple tools is often the way to go.
Yeah. For listeners who may have just tuned in, my guest is David Shaw. He is a whole systems designer and farmer, among other things, and founded Santa Cruz Permaculture and the UCSC Right Livelihood Center. Yeah, I witnessed myself traveling in the highlands of Guatemala, the various, we say Mayan, but there's actually multiple different people of that, who are in that language family, Mayan peoples. And they had, in many places, these very sort of delicate, they weren't flat, but they were terraced areas where they changed the gradient of the hillsides. And they also had these gravity-fed little canals. And when I say little, sometimes they were a couple of feet wide, but more typically they might be 6 or 8 inches wide, that would divert water out of little creeks along the contour line of the hillside, and that would feed all their fields. Wow. And I asked an elderly man in a small village, and this is 30 years ago or more, how long those had been there. And he said, I don't know. And I said, well, was it here when your parents were little? And he said, oh yes, and their parents too. So,
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't pretend to be like an academic with all this historical knowledge, but they were basically there for as long as the people had been there. And similar systems I witnessed in the Atlas Mountains of Morocco.
Yep.
And Morocco is a pretty dry climate.
Yeah.
And to your point of capturing water, I spent some time in this one village way in the high Atlas, and it was fall, so everything was very dried out. But they had threshing floors on the roofs of several of the houses where they would thresh grain using draft animals, very small donkeys that are very popular there and beautiful little creatures, where they would thresh the grain with the donkeys pulling the threshing boards.
Wow.
On the roofs of these houses. And it's steep and it's dry. And everywhere on these very steep, rocky slopes, there were little mini terraces held up by lines of stone that were dug directly from there. And that's where they grew all the grain, which had been harvested by the time I was there. But, this was a place that people had been inhabiting continuously for at least 1,200 years and probably longer. And like you say, the methods are there and have been proven.
Yeah.
And so amazing because the rainfall there is so minimal. I mean, I think I was told, that in one area, I don't know if it was exactly the same in that village, but in a nearby area, that the average rainfall was 12 inches a year. Well, that's, by our standards, that's semi-arid, or near desert. So it is amazing what people have developed.
Yeah, and it's not that these communities would be in the marginal hillsides necessarily by choice. It's that the flat bottom lands have been more conquered. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of permaculture projects, but also a lot of indigenous communities and farmers are pushed into the hillsides more and more. And it's great to see all the innovations and terraces to make the hillside flat. And yet, wow, it'd be nice to be down there, but that's a big city now.
Right.
I was just in Kathmandu.
Well, and it's actively happening. Yeah, tell us about Kathmandu.
Well, just in Kathmandu, it's the quickest growing city in South Asia. Wow. It's a sprawling area that is growing so rapidly and just, growing outward and people getting pushed further and further away. And this is a question I often ask myself around humanity and really kind of one of those sacred questions. Just where's it all headed? Mm-hmm. What's the, I don't say end game, but and it's not even like it has to be a master plan either, but I'm really interested in future scenarios. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of conversations around the future of work with artificial intelligence, the future of food, as we start to see the sort of, Bill Gates is the largest owner of farmland in the United States. And you have to ask the question, why and what are they up to? And there's this ag tech thing of basically farming without the farmer, robotics and precision agriculture and whatnot. And so there's this question, where are we headed? And where do we want to be headed, again, as designers?
Right. Yeah, and what's important? I mean, I was born in the 50s, and there was this constant sort of chant going on about labor-saving devices,
the microwave.
The microwave hadn't come out yet, but everything from washing machines to vacuum cleaners, TV dinners, TV dinner trays. Just the whole sort of this notion that technology was the way to go. Well, what about quality of life? Like, what does this mean for your quality of life? And understandably, there are certain tasks I would say I'm happy to have power equipment to do. I've dug trenches with a shovel. It's much easier with a backhoe and faster. Maybe there's a place for that, depending on how much trenching is really needed, right? Yeah. But that question of quality of life, I heard reflected to me by an indigenous woman, again, of Guatemala, that how much fun clothes washing time was.
Yes.
Because it was a huge social activity. Everybody taking their clothes down to the lakefront, and they're all socializing and joking and laughing and trading information and stories and washing their clothes and appreciating and being out essentially in nature, a beautiful lake and a beautiful lake shore, with beautiful clouds, it's like that was actually a valued activity. And we say, oh, well, we should get the washing machine. Well, who says,
Right.
So it's an interesting one to shift your focus. Like maybe labor under, capitalism is an unpleasant activity, and you want labor saving, but it doesn't have to be an unpleasant activity, which kind of brings me back to what you're doing in
Work
terms
is love
of
made
farm.
visible. Work is love made visible. That's a quote from Khalil Gibran in The Prophet, right?
Yeah.
So there's that notion, of loving our work. But in the case of the so-called developed world, when we're talking about these labor-saving devices, we were sold a lie that these would save time and that the time that was saved would be sort of allotted, the wealth generated or time saved would be allotted to the workers. But instead, that has been captured by the owners. And so we see now, since that time, the large income gap, wealth gap between the not even 1% and the 99% is now even.
It's the 0.1% and the 99.9%.
Exactly. So, the myth of the middle class in America, but really it's important to notice that basic principle that the technologies that that technology as a project we were promised would improve our lives. And I don't know about you, but are we working less hours now here in California in 2024 than back then? And are our wages higher to the point where it's easier to buy a house now than it was back then? Absolutely not. And there's tons of data to support that. And so we need to be really wary of our technologies. And, the last thing I want to give to someone addicted to technology is more technology, more of the fix. And so it may be that we need more vitamin N, more nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is a whole topic in itself of the research that's been going on recently about the beneficial effects of being exposed to nature, even as simple as if you can see a tree outside your window versus if you're looking outside at a parking lot.
Yeah.
But obviously, even more so if you're actually immersed in it to some degree and you have the sounds, the wind and the bird song and running waters and whatever, depending on your habitat, that there's enormous physical and mental benefits to that immersion in nature. Well, go figure it. We only had, up until 1800 or something, we had literally millions of years of evolution to get us to that point. And then all of a sudden we're like trying this other model. Oh no, let's work in factories or now office buildings for 40 hours a week and live inside of square structures. And is this really what we're suited to?
Absolutely not.
Right. It's such an interesting quandary we have created here. And yet we have enormous dependence on it. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that dependence. But first, we're going to take a really quick break. We will be right back with more with David Shaw right after this. Don't touch that dial. Welcome back to Talk of the Bay. I'm your host, Len B.A., and with me is David Shaw. He is a whole systems designer and farmer, among other things, and he founded Santa Cruz Permaculture and the UCSC Right Livelihood Center. And we've been talking about permaculture, and I've digressed us away from the central topic towards what it means to be looking at whole systems somewhat. But I want to come back, Dave, to about managing the land and water. You now operate a farm on the North Coast, not far from Año Nuevo State Park. How long have you been in operation there, and where do things stand at this point in terms of your your stewardship of that land?
Yeah, I started renting that land May 1st, 2022. So it's just been about 2 years, and it's amazing what we've been able to accomplish up there so far. The land is the unceded territory of the Kuroste people, who were sort of between the Awaswas and the Ramaytush, right at the sort of intersection of these two tribal groups, the Ramaytush extending up to San Francisco and the Awaswas extending down here to Santa Cruz. And the land is now being stewarded. You may have heard of the indigenous work happening at Pie Ranch with the Amamutsan Tribal Band and Kuroste Valley. There's a lot of great Amamutsan work happening up there now. I encourage people to check out. But the land was basically bought in 1917 by prior to that was the Spanish period, a lot of logging and ranching, and then the Mexican period, the rancheros, and then it was bought by a white guy from San Francisco whose family still owns it, and they've been farming it since 1917. Some of the first kiwis of California were planted there back when kiwis were kind of a new thing in the state. It was one of the first
Chinese gooseberries.
Exactly, right. Yeah. 1974. And so we still have some of those historic vines I've been renewing, and we've got this historic alala berry, tayberry, blackberry field out there. People, largely remember going there and picking berries for the past 30, 40 years. And for a while it was rented by Swanton Berry Farm. Mm-hmm. Actually, they grew, about 20 to 30 acres of strawberries up there every year. But then when I got the land 2 years ago, I've started moving it towards a permanent agriculture. So we're planting more and more perennials every year. We've got a huge planting of willow trees and sweetgrass and elderberry and perennial flowers, dahlias. So every year I'm multiplying my perennials that I have and growing them out more and more. But also right now we're doing CSA. We're doing annual vegetables and flowers for a community-supported agriculture program. We've got 30 members right now. We're always looking for more subscribers. And if you don't know about CSA, it's a way where you pay the farmer up front and then get a box of vegetables every week for the whole growing season. Our growing season is 25 weeks. It goes until Thanksgiving.
Great.
And it's a good value for the client. You get more food than if you were going to the grocery store. It's also fresher. People say, wow, this lettuce I got from you, it's lasted like 2 weeks in the fridge. What's the deal? I'm like, well, the stuff you get at the store has already been sitting around for a week by the time it comes to you. This was harvested that day. So It's very nutrient dense, very healthy, very fresh, very delicious. People say our strawberries are the best strawberries they've ever had in their life. And that means a lot to me because I'm, doing my best to grow good strawberries, but when people are like, this restores my faith in strawberries, it feels really good. And we're growing Albion. We're growing an older variety that maybe doesn't produce as much as the newer varieties, but the flavor's better. And like I said, they're really fresh, and we pick them when they're red as opposed to earlier. Yeah. Just cause. So it's a lot of fun, but really,
and I can attest they are outstanding strawberries. I've eaten some of them.
Yes, you've been there.
Yeah.
For our strawberry festival, in fact. But I gotta say, the farm first and foremost is an educational farm, right? We're trying to do something unique, which is to be an educational farm and a production farm. There's a lot of permaculture projects and educational projects that are like Life Lab and whatnot. But a lot of permaculture farms throughout the United States are more homesteads and grow your own, which is fantastic. There's very few that are more, production farms that are selling for a market, which has its challenges, but also its opportunities. So what we're doing right now is this permaculture principle, obtain a yield. We're obtaining a short-term yield through these annual vegetables and flowers, while also in the long term, we're producing more and more perennials every year to the point that by the time I die, may I live a long life, the place will be a perennial agroecosystem that will be able to, I hope, if all goes well, live off of the rainwater that we get and be a more self-sustaining system as opposed to a more intensive system where we have these inputs and this labor and whatnot to keep it going.
Right. So you provide trainings there, right? And you
lot,
have, I don't know if you call them interns, but people who come and spend extended amount of time learning the practices?
Yeah, we all of the above. We've got courses out there every weekend. The main format that we do is a cohort model where people join a cohort for 6 months and come out 1 weekend a month for 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 6 visits.
Right.
And so you'll get people from LA and Sacramento and out of state who will come to the area. You know, the permaculture design course is the first weekend of each month. Our herbalism and medicine making class is the second weekend of each month. Our permaculture skills class is the third weekend of each month.
Wow.
We've got a course in regenerative beekeeping and pollination and habitat, a course on permaculture food forests. We have these intensives that are in summer, a 2-week permaculture design intensive, and then an 8-day advanced permaculture design intensive. So those are our courses, and they're the number one way people interact with the farm. Most people are coming for courses. We've had over 1,000 alumni since I started teaching permaculture, which is
Wow.
insane. We were offering 5 permaculture design courses during COVID. During COVID, things increased. More people came to these courses. They've kind of leveled back off now. We're doing 3 a year. So that's the main way people come out, is through these classes. And, you know, I'd encourage people to check them out. We have, you know, expert instructors, a great location. And like I said, it's a working farm. It's also a working farm that's in evolution and being produced, which is a great learning opportunity because it's not a finished project. You're coming in kind of at the ground level. But yeah, like you said, we also have internships. We have right now, I think we have 5 UC Santa Cruz students coming out 1 or 2 days a week to learn and practice and sort of see on the ground the things that they've been studying in the classroom, to really get their hands on the irrigation, get their hands on soil texture and transplanting. And also for these younger folks, kind of trialing what the lifestyle is like. Some people come and do the internship and they say, I absolutely don't want to be a farmer. I thought I did, but now I see how hard it is and I don't want to do that. And that's a great thing to learn. I don't want to be selling snake oil to anybody. It's hard work. But a lot of folks say, wow, this would be so great to figure out a way to do this. And most farmers in California, unfortunately, have off-farm incomes that subsidize their ability to have a farm, like me. But then there's also volunteers. We have a lot of folks just come and volunteer. We do work trade for our courses. And then we do have a WOOF program, Willing Workers on Organic Farms, where it's like a homestay program or a guest stay program. And so we will occasionally have people living on site in a short-term sort of a work trade during the dry season, during the warm, warm-ish coastal Santa Cruz season.
Yeah, and I know people have done woofing in Europe and across the U.S. So, yeah.
It's so fun. I've woofed quite a bit myself.
All right. Yeah. Great. Wow. And you mentioned some of what you're growing and your approach to trying to get it to more perennials, and you included trees in that. And I wonder if you could kind of give us a vision of what does a tree-based agricultural process look like? What would one see when that's in maturity? Yeah,
well, agroforestry is kind of this big term for perennial agroecosystem, but it doesn't just involve food. It's not just agricultural. And, the United States Department of Agriculture manages forests as well, not just farmland. So you can talk about timber products, non-timber forest products. What I'm talking about is really the concept of a food forest or an edible forest garden. So we're talking about a multi-layered, a vertically stacked system where you've got tall trees, shorter trees, herbaceous perennials, ground covers, vines, things like that, root systems, root vegetables and whatnot. So one system I'm particularly inspired about is when I hike around the woods, sometimes I'll come to these areas that have our native blue elderberry with stinging nettles in the understory. And I look at that and just say, well, here we are. We've arrived. We've got this edible berry. Now you can't eat them raw. They have a chemical that turns into cyanide in the body.
Oh.
So you can get a little tummy ache.
Right.
But when you cook them, they're sweet and delicious. And furthermore, they have strong immune system enhancing qualities. So very important during times of COVID and the coming times ahead. And then you've got these beautiful flowers that attract beneficial insects. And then you've got in the understory stinging nettles, which, yes, you can get stung by it, but if you cook it, it's better than spinach. It's better than kale. It's like, well, quote me on that or not, you make your own decision.
But nutritionally, it's great. And
high in iron, delicious. You can go down to Pizzeria Avanti and get a pizza, the stinger. It's the stinger pizza. It's like gorgonzola, nettle deliciousness.
Great.
I'll take nettles over most leafy greens any day of the week. I love them. So,
any tips for harvesting?
is there a pun there? The tips, because obviously you are oftentimes you are harvesting the tips, and gloves, long sleeves. But also you can kind of roll them up in a way and not get stung. You can actually roll them up and eat them raw and not get stung.
Yeah, because isn't it the underside of the leaves that have the little needles, whatever they are?
They're kind of all over the place.
Okay.
But there are ways. There are some tricks. It's easier to show you than to
explain
it.
Well, obviously I'll have to make a commitment and get out there.
Get out there. Yeah, they're delicious. They're all over the place. And so, the higher level of thinking is actually to tend to the patches that already exist and help them grow.
Right.
There's another way of thinking about it, which is to transplant and to plant new trees and to plant, nettle starts like that, which is probably the direction I will head in. But I think there's also a lot to be said for tending the wild. And I want to give credit where credit is due to Kat Anderson and her amazing dissertation that turned into a book called Tending the Wild about California traditional ecological knowledge. If you haven't heard of it or read it, check it out. We refer to it every day of our permaculture class because it is important to go out to the places where these plants are already growing and tend to them.
Yeah. And I know the native people did a lot of land management in terms of moving plants around, propagating seed, starting fires to keep other species down. And obviously keep fire risk down. But it's, there's so much there about how do you tend that. So it's on my reading list. And also with elderberry, I have not harvested it myself for this purpose, but people have gifted me fiber from the elderberry stalk. And I have made cordage with that fiber, and it's excellent material. It's excellent fiber for really any kind of utilitarian thing that you need to make, whether thread or cordage or nets or something like that. So elderberry has multiple uses that way.
Nettle is a great cordage as well. And elderberry, you can use for fire by friction, but also my friend Canyon Sayers Roots makes clapper sticks with it, a percussive instrument. So these are multifunctional perennial plants. And so, what we're talking about is anything you're using plastic for or buying from the hardware store, can we grow it on the farm? Bamboo comes to mind as another thing, not saying I'm going to be growing bamboo up there necessarily. It takes a lot of water, but what else could we be producing in addition to food? We've got community-supported agriculture. What about community-supported medicine? Community-supported flowers? Community-supported community. What a great concept. But, also, as a farmer in California, there's a lot of vegetable farmers here. There's a lot of, competition, if you will. Right. I don't really look at it that way, but what else? What else is possible? And furthermore, as I said earlier, this farm is a farm for imagination. This farm is for holding and healing and building community. The farming and the production is a part of it because I've found that the most inspiring and educational places are also some of the most productive places. But it's definitely not going to be a monoculture or just a, production-focused operation. It needs to be something more because it's what I'm dedicating my life to.
Right. And we could talk about the permaculture and the kind of growing of and regenerating life on the land all the way through our program, but I wanted to spend a little time with your work with the Right Livelihood Center. And I know, among other things, you took a trip to India last year, and you met with people in several parts of India who are engaged in regenerative agriculture, reforestation, and lots of other things. I wondered, what did you witness in your travels there? What were some of the things that impressed you?
Yeah, so for those who don't know, Right Livelihood is the alternative Nobel Prize. Right, the Right Livelihood Award is given out in the late fall in Stockholm, Sweden, a week before the Nobel Peace Prize, and so it's become known as the alternative Nobel. And some of the award winners include Dennis Mukwege, Amy Goodman, Vandana Shiva, Greta Thunberg, Edward Snowden, and Daniel Ellsberg. Many, many other folks that I think your listeners may know about. And I went to India. Oh, I guess I should say one more thing, that my role with Right Livelihood is that I'm now the global secretariat of the Right Livelihood College. So there's about 200 award winners. We call them laureates of the Right Livelihood Award. And they're from over 75 countries worldwide. And then about 15 years ago, the Right Livelihood Foundation created the Right Livelihood College to link with brick and mortar universities, to link the laureates with faculty and students, to link activists and academics, to amplify and boost the winning ideas around agroecology and permaculture. Bill Mollison, in fact, is a Right Livelihood Award laureate. He got the third award, the founder of permaculture, got the third award in 1981.
Great.
And so we're looking at ways of amplifying and boosting these urgently needed solutions to global problems. And so my trip in India in December was to visit 8 laureates and 1 Right Livelihood College. I coordinate the Right Livelihood College at UC Santa Cruz, and my colleague Swati Banerjee coordinates the Right Livelihood College in Mumbai, India. And so I visited Swati and met her, some of the faculty and students there, and then visited 8 laureates. Vandana Shiva at Earth University, Meta Patkar, Colin Gonsalves, human rights lawyer, the Legal Initiative for Forest and the Environment, also environmental law,
Wow.
the Kerala science writers in the communist state of Kerala, which is a very interesting place to go. Met with Sapros in Nepal. We went to Nepal as well. And, SEVA, the Self-Employed Women's Association in Ahmedabad. That was amazing. And everywhere we went, they rolled out the red carpet for us. It felt like such an honor to be an ambassador and to bring messages of peace and solidarity, and to honestly, to start to explore collaborations. Because, the Right Livelihood Foundation, when they got the award, many of these peoples received a cash award of about $100,000 US.
Great.
So there's a little boost for their movements. And Ela Bhatt started the Self-Employed Women's Association, which is now a labor union of 2.5 million women.
Wow.
Who are working in the, a whole variety of domains as farmers, trash pickers, salt miners, you name it, the sort of informal sector,
Right.
Self-employed.
Yeah.
Right. And so a lot of these folks, they don't pay taxes. They don't, have a paycheck. They're just sort of in the informal economy and mostly living hand to mouth. And a lot of times were without, if they were working in factories or whatnot, in very poor labor conditions, very, very poor. And so by forming a union, they're able to advocate for their rights, make higher wages. And ultimately now, SEVA has their own farms. They have their own cafes. They have their own, you name it. I went to a
they've been
restaurant.
able to capitalize a little bit.
Yeah. So what we're talking about with technology earlier, I don't want to say capturing is maybe the right term, but when there's an income, that income is going to them and going back to their organization. It's not going away.
Right.
Right? They're keeping that income within their family, within their system, and thus able to grow. And so we went to a cafe where the food was grown by women in Seva, the napkins were made by women in Seva, the little store on the side had stuff for sale from the women of Seva.
Wow.
You know, on and on and on, the whole thing. And it's funny because, you know, some people are like, that sounds like communism. It sounds like, you know, everything's like...
But it's free enterprise. I mean, what do you mean?
Basically, I don't care what we call it. It's the next system that I want to live in. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. And it's very, sounds like it's very community based. Like
big time.
It's this, whatever economic gain is happening is going back into the community and recirculating, creating additional opportunities for people.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I'd say check out Seva. And also, they were showing me photos of Hillary Clinton and Ela Bhatt. Apparently they were very close, and that Ela Bhatt, the founder, was a big inspiration for Hillary Clinton and many, many other people. So I absolutely will be going back to visit them and build more connections with them.
Yeah. And I understand there's a lot of what I'll call, you know, amazing regenerative agriculture going on in different places in India. And I'm sure there's other places where it's the opposite. But but it seems like, you know, they're proving the application of a lot of these principles. Did you get to see any of that?
Yeah, well, the two that come to my mind are Vandana Shiva's Earth University in the north, in Dehradun. Vandana has helped to create and inspire and collaborate around 200 women-run seed cooperatives throughout India. Right? We visited the one that's at her farm. But, you know, when you go to the farm there are all these different beds, these different paddocks. Each one is a different variety of a different crop. There's just hundreds of different fields there, each growing a small amount of a crop for seed and then redistributing it. And that's just a small, you know, her farm's not tiny, but it's small compared to what you know is going on elsewhere. So that was a very interesting visit. And then
I think, you know, for those of us who aren't farmers, you know, we may overlook the importance of seed, but every crop, particularly any annual crop you plant, the seed has to come from somewhere. And the traditional way that's been done is farmers have grown their own seed, traded seed, whatever. But having a cooperative where you've got, as you said, literally hundreds of varieties of different plants that they can all share is incredible. Plus, I gather they can give each other feedback.
Yes.
Oh, this one worked really good in this dry soil or this clayey soil or whatever. Like they can develop that knowledge within their community through the sharing of seed.
Yeah, that's it, Lynn. There's knowledge in the seed and in the seed saver and in the community. When we have monocultures, they produce monocultures of the mind. It's a concept from Vandana Shiva. So there's a book by that title. So we need to be having polycultures, especially in times of uncertain climates where we need to have seeds and a diversity to adapt to changing climates. This one does better in times of drought. This one is adapting and as the climate is adapting, these seeds are adapting as well. And then furthermore, there's these questions of who owns what.
Yeah.
You know, is the cost of seeds something that's controlled from an external force, or is it something that's controlled internally through a more farmer-to-farmer network like that? And the second project that comes to my mind, I have a colleague, Andrew Millison from Oregon State University, who makes these fantastic permaculture videos. You've got to check him out. Andrew Millison. And when Kaylee and I were in India, we were looking at some of these videos and seeing, do we want to go visit this place and check out that place? And one of the places we didn't go to because the video was so good that we said, you know, let's not get on another plane and get on another bus and go all the way over there. That just, you know, was so inspiring. But you can see these projects from space. They're so large. Wow. And there's this thing in Maharashtra called the Water Cup. It's a competition to get villagers inspired to go out and regenerate the watershed by building swales and berms and ponds and on like that.
Wow, great.
And so because it's a competition, many different communities are doing it. And so it's happening on the ground.
Yeah.
At the same time, there's one that's going to win the gold prize and the silver like that. And And so it's a way of, the community coming together to do something that's really going to benefit the community in the long term, while also, acknowledging their work
Right.
globally
Great.
and with the cash award. So I would check out the Water Cup and these videos from Andrew Millison.
Wonderful. Well, we have just a little over a minute left, and I want to make sure you have an opportunity to tell listeners how to find out more about Santa Cruz Permaculture and the Right Livelihood Center, and maybe even if they wanted to join your CSA. Yeah,
well, our websites are probably the best places to go, or our Instagrams. So santacruzpermaculture.com, or for the CSA, it's santacruzpermaculture.com/CSA. And that's also our handle on Instagram. And then Right Livelihood, you could check out rightlivelihood.ucsc.edu, or go to the mothership, rightlivelihood.org, to learn about our work globally. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, David Shaw, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the program. And I think in another year, you're going to have a lot more to tell us. So I hope to have you back on the show.
I'd love that. Thank you.
Thanks for being here.